ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Dynamic Lifestyle Podcast. We have our guest, Lyle McDonald. Lyle, how you doing today?
Very well. Thanks for having me.
Very welcome. I'm really digging that hat that you're wearing.
Yeah.
Tis the season.
Absolutely.
The $1 million question is, will you go lift with that hat on?
Have I ever worn this at the gym? I probably have. Some of your, I don't know how familiar some of your listeners will be. I actually was in Salt Lake City speed skating at the Oval there for many years. I actually would usually skate with this, at least during warm-ups at some point. A, because it was funny, and B, because it annoyed my coach. But yeah, I'll probably, I think I've tried doing like power cleans and stuff, but it always comes off and it gets really warm. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Lyle. So we like getting our show started with letting our listeners kind of get an understanding of who the guest is and what your story is. So if you could kind of let us know who Lyle McDonald is, that'd be great.
So short version, I am old as dirt. I went to school at UCLA in exercise physiology from 88 to 93. I'd gotten into that through a combination of gymnastics, triathlon. I was actually a very inactive, kind of chubby kid. Video games, I grew up in the 80s when all that was really starting. I did sports, and it just never really kind of connected with me. Got into high school, we had mandatory athletics. Started to see those changes in your body that are kind of like, I like this. And that kind of just drove me into sports. I did cycling and swimming and martial arts. Got into gymnastics. That led me to UCLA. Started exercise physiology. Got into inline skating. This was 88 to 93. Like most, I was a mediocre athlete, and I wanted to be better. So, I read all the magazines. I wanted to believe all the magic supplements, this, that, and the other. And, I had some good exercise physiology teachers, and they introduced me to the concept of the biomedical library. And that's sort of where it really began for me. Was I started looking into the research behind the claims and behind the supplements. And it really was just me trying to make myself a better athlete. I just was lucky enough to turn it into a career. So I got out of college in 93 when the internet was starting. I got on that early message boards. I was your standard fresh graduate college student who thought he knew everything about everything and just sort of started answering questions. Nobody knew what the internet was. People seemed to like what I had to say. Websites became a thing. Nobody knew what they were for, but everybody had to have one. So people started paying me to write articles, and that would lead me kind of ultimately, right? I'd say 96, Dan Duchesne's book Body Opus came out, the first cyclical low-carb diets. That summer, I kind of got very involved in that. There's also Mauro Di Pasquale's anabolic diet, and through my interest in that, wanted to write sort of a scientifically defensible book on ketogenic diets. Originally had a co-author, didn't work out. Long and short of it led me to my first book, The Ketogenic Diet. Nearly killed me, nearly had a nervous breakdown, but that sort of established me in the industry. Career-wise, since then, I've written, I think, 13 books on just various topics. I don't really like revisiting the same thing, so I've done a rapid fat loss book. I was actually one of the very first people to really formalized flexible dieting in 2004. Like now that's all you hear about. And it's like 12 years ago, I was, not that these were new concepts, but I really kind of formalized the idea. My Ultimate Diet 2, a couple weird little drug books, a protein book. Right now I'm working on this tome on women's physiology and fat loss, which is a project that A, will be amazing if it's ever done, and B, I wish I never started because it's just been crushing me for the last year and a half, having to learn a physiology that is 1,000 times more involved than men's. And, I've been in this industry since it started on the internet, since, like I said, I got online in 94. I think my website's been up since 98. So I've been around forever, and most people know who I am. My opinions of me can vary quite profoundly because of some personality, some stuff I've dealt with over many years, which I'm also happy to talk about. So that's kind of, I'm just like the old man in the industry. There's people coming out now, Eric Helms, who actually put me in touch with you guys. Yeah. Guys like Brad Schoenfeld, Brett Contreras, Brad and Eric have told me, they're like, we were reading your stuff when we were in school, which is, it's cool to hear. And I think I was one of the first to really push heavy evidence-based stuff. I was really big into the research, and at the time it really hit like a lead brick. Nobody wanted to listen. But there's a lot of guys now that, like I said, Eric, Brad, Brett, there's others I'm not ignoring, who have both a personal background either in weight training, bodybuilding, powerlifting, but also have the academic credentials. And I think it's really changing a lot of the field in that way. Eric's doing research, very well designed. Brad Schoenfeld, God, I don't know how he has time to do anything. He puts out a paper weekly.
Yeah.
But he's doing some really applied study designs that actually are useful for bodybuilding. So those guys are kind of coming up, and for good or for bad, I think I was part of kind of paving the way for that.
Yeah.
I fear that we're going to reach the point that if you don't have a PhD, your opinion won't matter, but it is nice to see some of that changing. So that's kind of the long and the short of who I am.
Great. No, that was perfect. So thanks for kind of going in depth with that.
Sure.
So if I miss anything on this next question on, kind of what you do. So you do a lot of different things, such as writing, being interviewed, consulting, coaching, and I would say educating as well. So again, if I miss anything, sorry about that, but correct me if I'm wrong. So what would you say is kind of the main driving force behind why you wear so many hats? Would you look back maybe like 20 years ago and think you were doing something maybe different this day besides wearing like 4 or 5 different hats?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of what drove me originally, like I said, was just I wanted to be a better athlete. There's kind of that old joke where, dietitians were overweight and psychologists are crazy and everybody's kind of trying to kind of fix themselves. I was lucky enough to just turn it into a career. Like I said, I was just in the right place at the right time as the internet developed to start doing a lot of writing. I don't know that I ever saw myself as really being a book writer. I mean, it's funny. I had roommates who were English majors and they're in computers now, and I studied exercise physiology. I kind of just fell into that. People liked what I had to say. I wrote my first book, and in a lot of ways, like, I don't know if you guys have ever personal trained or coached, but it can be emotionally exhausting, right? Like, you want to help everybody, and factually you can't. And it's very exhausting when you just can't find out how to motivate someone. In a very real way, switching more to books, it's like, I can make sure that the good information is out there, and then what people do with it is very much not my problem. And I know that sounds kind of crass and cynical, and it is crass and cynical, but it was a reality. Like, it was exhausting doing everything I could and having people just not want to do anything on their own, whether that was limitation in my motivational ability or like, it's hard for me to tell. But it was very, and then people liked my first book for some reason. It's still my least favorite because it reads like a textbook. And so I just kind of, once I got back to writing, I just kind of kept doing it. I've written, I think I've got over 500 articles on my website, something absurd. I'm running out of things to write about. At this point, I can't come up with anything new and interesting. And a lot of it, I think early on, like I said, it came out of trying to make myself a better athlete. But then as I realized that people really liked what I had to say and that I was kind of this psycho-obsessional comprehensivist, right? My first book has over 600 references. I have stuff from the 1920s that I pulled out of the biomedical library because you don't tell someone obsessional to be complete or be comprehensive. Like, it really became this pressure that I felt like I had to keep up with everything. And that became exhausting. I've gone through a number of phases of burnout through my career where just like, especially as the information has, exponentialized, trying to keep up with everything and not specialize has become exhausting over my life.
Yeah.
What's interesting now, honestly, I don't coach very much if I can avoid it. I like interesting situations. Like, I'll be honest, hand-holding someone to 5% body fat and telling them not to eat tomatoes, I find that very uninteresting because it's just not that hard. I've had some really interesting folks that I've worked with. I had a guy that had a congenital spinal disease where his discs were turning to bone. Like, he was a permanent hunchback and he wanted to strongman. So, imagine dealing with sort of working around these dynamics. I had a guy email me who's actually had, I think, a above the elbow amputation, and he wanted some questions like how to modify my ultimate diet too, how to modify his diet. Like, I find things like that really fascinating, and occasionally I need guinea pigs, but I don't do a lot of coaching if I can avoid it. I get asked about it all the time, so it's really just writing. I don't know. I think I like well, I like hearing myself talk or see right, but it's like I like getting good information out there. There's so much noise. There's so much terrible information, and I see it's still, as much as I've tried to get away with it through my books, it still like hurts. Like I hate that so many people get so misled by so much misinformation. And while I find it very unproductive to try to criticize and attack that, like I know a lot of people do that, you know, oh, you should just tear apart something on the internet. I could do that 10 times a day and it accomplishes nothing. I would rather put out better information, and I realize I don't reach the mass market, but they come to me or they come to the evidence-based people when they're tired of the BS, right? Once they've tried all the magic that didn't work, and they go looking for better information, I like that I'm presenting it. So for a while, it was just really this drive to know everything. I wanted to build a mathematical model of the human body, which, good luck. I should have been an engineer, computer programmer. That got exhausting. I'll be honest now, due to some personal stuff that happened over the last few years, my drive has really changed. I kind of retired for about 3 or 4 years, and it was actually when I retired from sport. After my speed skating thing, I was 40 years old. I'd had my last hurrah. I didn't want to be that guy at 45, you know, trying to make that last run at it. And I really took about 3 years where I just did nothing. I didn't write. I didn't read. I was really just mainly because it didn't apply to me anymore. So I kind of lost interest. Had some stuff go wrong in my life for a couple of years that I've gotten dealt with, and realized this is what I'm good at. And since I've returned to it, it's now just more of a job rather than an obsession. Like, I've still got that drive to want to know it. Like, writing this woman's book, that's part of why it's a nightmare. I'll pull one review paper and then want to read the 50 individual papers, then want to read their reference list, and then suddenly I'm 6 layers deep because I just have to know the details. But it's become much less if I don't write for a week or I don't lose my mind like I used to. Right. So it's probably a much healthier overall approach, but it took me basically having to lose my mind for about a year to kind of get to return to it with a much better attitude. Yeah. So my drive has really changed since I was younger to where I am now.
Okay. Now I'm really interested to know, in that 3-year gap where you kind of just retired, what did you learn in those 3 years that maybe pushed you towards what you're doing right now?
Well, I don't know that I learned anything. I just kind of got into some unhealthy environments. I'll just kind of put it that way for lack of a better word, lack of a better phrasing. A lot of what I learned was getting older sucks. Simply because, you know, when you've pursued something really 24/7, really relentlessly for almost 20 years or more, to suddenly have that gone leaves your life very empty, right? Like we've all seen those athletes. They've been an athlete since they were 12 that never want to retire, right? Because what do you do at age 42 when all you've known is sport and being great? Typically, they don't know what to do with their lives. And for several years, I was just really bored. I was bored. I was unhappy. I hate to call it. I mean, it was like a midlife crisis of, okay, I'm 40. I don't want to do the only thing I've really known anymore. Now what? Yeah. Like, what do I do for the next 30 years of my life? I mean, I was lucky enough that because of my website, because I've been around, you know, I've got an income, which is both good and bad, right? Like my books sell almost regardless of what I do. Bizarrely, I found that like if I send out newsletters, like I got to the point that the more work I did, my sales went down, which didn't really motivate me to want to do anything. I'm like, I just leave it alone. I don't have to advertise. I don't have to market. I don't have to do a weekly YouTube video because I've been around for so long. Right. Like I know guys coming up now, it's it's so much harder now.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
In every industry, not just the fitness industry, but there's so much competition to stand out over the noise in a world where you remember the last thing you saw 30 seconds ago, and there's already 10 more videos to watch. Yep. If you're not on Instagram and Tumblr and Tinder and not Tinder. Okay, Tinder, we're going to go with that. Facebook, Twitter, if you're not doing that relentlessly, if your social media presence is there, you just don't exist.
Yeah, it's like you're almost forgotten.
I had the advantage of not needing to do that. I've actually never done really my only direct if you want to call it advertising, was just putting out good information.
Yeah.
Right. I've had people go, you should make your site a pay site. Well, no. I don't like the idea of a pay site for information, but my model is provide the free information and hopefully people keep coming back and maybe eventually they buy a book. It's that kind of model, even though it wasn't deliberate. I just wanted to get good information out there. But my books sold no matter what, which was good in that I had an income, but bad in that it let me do sweet nothing all day. And I don't know if you guys have ever been in that situation. Like every day you get up and you're like, today's the day, man. I got 18 hours. I'm going to get everything done. And suddenly 16 hours of PlayStation later, you're like, well, tomorrow's the day.
Yeah.
There is that that just, that inertia of lethargy. And I was just, people were like, how you doing? I'm like, I just exist. Like I'm bored. I have no purpose. I would actually end up in therapy several years later, and my therapist actually put it very usefully. And I think that he said, you lack MVP, you lack meaning, value, and purpose, which is critical to, the human experience. I had none of these things. I had no reason other than just being alive to really be there. I didn't feel like I was contributing anything. Getting back into my field, again, with a much healthier attitude towards it, recreated that in me. It was like, okay, I'm going to start putting out more articles and start on a new book. And even though the book that actually the woman's book derives from was a spite project, someone apparently plagiarized my flexible dieting book, claimed that she pioneered the concept and made way more money off of her book than I'll ever make. And I'm like, you know what? I got to go rewrite that book. And then that sort of ballooned into another project, and then that spun off. So like that was it was like, I'm going to just screw that chick. I'm going to forget her. I'm going to go rewrite this book. But it was good. And then it just kind of got me back doing what I was doing. And it gave me that meaning, value, and purpose. So for 3 or 4 years, I just didn't have it. And it's really a miserable place to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I'm going to sit around for 30 years and just wait until I die.
Yeah.
Which is not a very happy place to be.
Yeah. So I want to kind of piggyback off this this same topic because we're really huge on wanting to know people's lowest points in life and kind of how you overcame that. So you mentioned earlier about kind of how you said you had a nervous breakdown. Can you kind of just
breakdown? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I just want to know can you tell us more about that and how that happened?
Well, over the last 3 or 4 years, and people, I think people had suspected this early on. Like I knew I was prone to depression. After I finished my first book, I went through 3 years of a deep depression. And again, same thing. Graduate students or PhD students go through it all the time, right? You spend 5 years, do your thesis, and it's like, now what do I do? The one thing that's driven my life is now gone. So actually why a lot of PhD candidates don't ever finish their thesis, because the fear of having nothing left. So for me, I knew I was prone to depression, and I'd been medicated for depression previously. And there was some indication that I also had some hypomanic tendencies. Hypomania being like, mania is, true mania, you're hallucinating, completely out of control, frequently end up hospitalized. Hypomania is kind of below that, and hypomania is awesome. And talk to anyone who's ever experienced it. It's the best time of your life because you're productive, you're creative, your brain is working better, nothing can go wrong. It's awesome. The problem is that when you have this, the cycles start to get worse over time with aging and every time they happen. So from about 2010 to the final thing in 2014, I was kind of cycling between depressed and usually in the fall, and then about April, I'd bop out and it was kind of coming to this. And it eventually came to a head that in the fall of 2014, I basically made this disastrous financial investment, lost my entire life savings. It was just a total nightmare experience because I had basically a full-blown hypomanic episode. I cratered into this severe depression. Like can't get out of bed for 3 days, like sleeping 18 hours, can't function, depression. Kind of came out of that. Thankfully, I've got a great support system. My mom had put up with all of my BS over the years. Financial people, lawyer, went back to Nashville, got into treatment, and long and the short of it is I have bipolar 1, which this is kind of like bipolar 2, right? manic depressive bipolar is the extreme version. You go from suicidal to hallucinations. I've got like the milder version. So you go from depressed to hypomania. Now, hypomania is, like I said, it's awesome. It's why people who with bipolar 2 don't want to get medicated. Why would I want it? And that's the problem. You're depressed, you get medicated, you're not depressed anymore, and then you're awesome. And when you're awesome, why would I go back to the doctor, right? I feel fantastic. I'm clearly cured, until eventually you crash again. And what happens, you hit such a high that when you finally crash and end up here, it's like falling off a cliff, right? The way my therapist described it is, right, most people, everybody has bad days, right? You guys have good days, you have bad days. For the average person, going from a good day to a sad day, it's like stumbling off a curb. When you go from mania, where the possibilities are limitless, to can't get out of bed, want to go somewhere and crawl into a hole till you die, it's like jumping off of a building. Just because in contrast, it's such a big difference. So I went through that, got properly medicated, and I've been medicated for the last year and a half. And I think that was a lot of what really made me more stable in my career as well. And as miserable of an experience as it was, the fact that I'm still dealing with the consequences of it several years later, and will be for about another year and a half, just there's some possibly impending like bankruptcy and Secretary of State stuff. Like it was a horrible, horrible situation. But that's the kind of choice, that's the kind of decision you make. And like you hear about people who are truly manic. They're the ones that buy 3 jets because they know their book's going to sell 1 million copies. They run up. I mean, you hear about people. My mom knew someone who went from being a tenured professor to living in her car. Like this is what happens when you go completely off the rails. Right. You know, I was lucky. I still had an income. I had a family that cares about me, and I had a fairly easily medicated situation. As horrible as it was, it's the best thing that could have happened to me, because if it hadn't happened, I wouldn't have gotten help.
Right.
Like frequently, like you said, you know, the question, the genesis of your question, what's the lowest point? Frequently, until you've been there, you don't have that reason to ever try to change something.
Right.
Yep. I had to truly see rock bottom, to truly see what I'd lost, which again, my therapist described GSR, guilt, shame, and regret. Because all you do is you sit there and just go, how could I have, like, what in the hell was I thinking? How could I have possibly made this investment? Which essentially, to tone it down a little bit, basically on the spur of the moment, I bought a nightclub. Because, you know, how could that go wrong? I'm an exercise physiologist. Of course I know how to. This is brilliant. It can't fail. Yeah, so that's kind of what happened. Okay. In the most general sense. And like I said, I'm glad it happened, because if it hadn't, who knows what would have happened 5 years down the road. Right.
Yeah, and I acknowledge you for that, because I think in this day and age too, with all the madness going on, how hardwired we are with just all the social media, the go, all the pressure, I think a lot of people struggle with a lot of like psychological problems. And it's just it's that one thing. Are you going to go ask for help, or are you just going to just pretend like everything's okay? And I think too, a lot of somebody's past is really the root of the problem, the way they are in the present.
Right. And part of it for me, you know, I said, even depression took me a while to deal with. My father actually dealt with the same stuff. Now, he was of the generation of the 50s. Mental illness, you just needed to sack up, right? This was a personality weakness. He wouldn't get medicated. He wouldn't deal with it. And he kind of threw his life away at the very end of it, just out of depression. It took me a while to get past that. And I think there's also there's a male aspect of that kind of macho BS that comes into play sometimes. But it was like, once you get medicated and you're like, you know, do I like being medicated? No. Are there potential side effects down the road? Sure. But compared to what's behind door number 2, I'll take this in a heartbeat. And, you know, and I'm lucky in the sense of I'm on a single medication and it's a magic B6 supplement that's really heavily involved in this. And again, I was super lucky. There's a lot of therapy and treatment clinics for this that aren't very good. Mine, super evidence-based, super, like, they keep up with the research. They did genetic testing. They did blood testing. I mean, they checked, vitamin D and hormones, and went to this genetic test for certain genetic markers. So I got super lucky with them as well, and that they had an opening at Christmas and all this other stuff. So, but yeah, and I agree with you. Like, not only is there the go, 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 I think we've created a culture of people think that if they're not happy all the time, they're doing it wrong.
Right.
Like that's what you see in TV, movies, media. Like, if you have a bad day, clearly that's a weakness on your part. You are failing at life if you are not 100% happy all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. We could talk about this all day, but I want to stay on one more question on this topic, because I think it's really interesting. I think the listeners really need to hear this type of stuff. So you're sitting at 45 right now, and you just told us this incredible story and everything you went through. So what would you say right now is the greatest gift, talent you haven't discovered, but you feel it's going to come out soon?
Huh. That's a good question. I don't know that I have a good answer for that. Like, it's weird. I don't know. How old are you guys?
31.
Okay, so you're probably old enough to have experienced this. Like, you can probably already look back. I do this about every 10 years, right? When you were 20, you're like, you know what? I got it figured out. I get it now. Like, when I was a teenager, I was an idiot. Now I've got it. 5 or 10 years from now, you look back at 30-year-old you and go, God, what was I thinking? God, how could I have been so dumb? And you'll do that pretty much every 5 or 10 years throughout your entire life until your behaviors just become so locked in, which is a long way of saying, like, I don't know that I can predict any of that. I'd really like to finish this woman's book. I think that's really, I wish I could get a little bit more focus on my writing. I don't really know, like, having, been an athlete of, like I said, I was good. I was never going to be great. Having been super active my whole life, like, aging is kind of terrifying. Like, there's an element of that, I don't know if I'm going to hit a certain age and my personality is going to change completely. I kind of doubt it, just because I've been too locked in my ways. So I don't really have an answer for that question of what I haven't discovered in myself. That could be sort of a life changer.
Well, maybe it could be this book, that could be a gift right there to change a bunch of lives,
And I think, and it is, like I said, as horrible is the wrong word, because it's not that the topic doesn't need to be written about. It's that every so often I do this to myself. My first book, when my co-author, who's going to write the nutritional biochemistry part, fell out, I had to go learn an entirely new field. Like, I had the general background, but my background is really in exercise. Was it a nightmare? Yeah. But when I came out of it, I added an entirely new knowledge base to myself.
Right.
I had to build in my 30s. A guy who was handling my website couldn't get it together. So I'm like, okay, I have to go learn HTML, CSS, and PHP, and I got to do this myself. It was 6 weeks of hell. It was 6 weeks of trying to learn 3 new languages that I had no concept for. It was a nightmare, but now I have that skill set.
Right.
So this project has been different, not only in that it's a different underlying physiology, but it's a physiology that a man at a fundamental level can't comprehend, right? I mean, we deal with it in the sense of, and deal with it is also the wrong phrasing. We experience it through girlfriends and the females in our life. We can see what's going on, but we don't have any sort of natural empathy or understanding of it on a conceptual level. Like, I think it would do so much for human relations.
Yeah.
I heard the greatest story just recently. There's apparently a bra company that forced its male employees to wear a harness that put a bunch of weight on the front of their chest so that the males could understand the female experience to at least first approximation of what it's like to have breasts and that weight in the front. If you made every guy go through 2 menstrual cycles and have to deal with the emotional changes that occur, or in the contrary, if you took females and made them understand what it's like to be a guy, which is a whole different experience. Talk to any female that's like taking anabolic steroids, and she'll be like, I have relentless, never-ending, single-minded sex drive. Like, welcome to what being a man is every day of our life.
Yeah.
I'm like, now you get it, don't you? You get why men act the way we do, because this is the singular drive in our entire life. And it cuts both ways. And like, that's all. It's a really funny story. They're like, every 6 minutes, that's all I want to do is get laid. I'm like, welcome to being a man. So in that sense, like, even from the get-go, I was learning an entirely new base of just concept of the terminology of the menstrual cycle, of the physiology that was involved. Like, I knew it in general terms, just as a background physiology, but women really fundamentally are not just little men, even though that's how they get treated. So I do think this, as much as my other projects, like, there's been other attempts to write about this. Most tend to be really textbook, very not practically oriented, and some of what's out there is just appalling. It's really been interesting having Eric Helms. He's contributing a couple sections to the book because he's far more in touch with like peak week bodybuilding and things than I am. And the stuff that he's kind of worked out through working with his female competitors is basically identical to what the research that I've done on the theory end has kind of come up with. Like trust me, his scientific background is phenomenal, but a lot of it was just experientially determining things. And it's been really nice to have a sounding board with him for this, because I think, in as much as a lot of the information probably still won't be accepted, it's like a lot of stuff that women are doing, either because they're trying to copy men's diets or just because of the misinformation. For a man, it may be suboptimal. For a woman, it can be physiologically damaging. Like, women face issues that men just don't. We don't have a menstrual cycle to lose. Men die before we lose enough bone density to have hip osteoporosis and hip problems. Women who are losing their menstrual cycle for months on end, they are doing themselves potentially permanent damage. And a lot of the ideas that either mainstream media, the physique subculture, or even that women impose upon themselves diet-wise is really detrimental and pathological from, physiological and a psychological standpoint. So this will be one of those projects that, absolutely, I think will be a field changer, just because it hasn't, let's face it, there's 80 million books on fat loss. There's 80 million books on interval training. There's only so many different ways you can write a hypertrophy program. They're all more similar than they are different. But outside of a couple things that, I read one, it was a really long book. It mentioned the menstrual cycle in one sentence and had one brief chapter, and it had to do with eating patterns in women. There was no specific women's physiology addressed. Even all they seem to have done is just taken a different project and copy and pasted female for male, but it had nothing to do with women's physiology. And that's the baseline difference. The menstrual cycle is the fundamental hormonal difference. Before you add birth control, elevated testosterone in women, menopause, perimenopause, all this other stuff. Then just have testosterone that's either high or low. So it hasn't really been done before, certainly not. With the scope and obsessiveness to detail that I bring to the project, this is, again, my reference list alone is like 28 pages, and that's volume 1. It got so long I had to split this into nutrition, diet, and fat loss, and then training has to be a separate book because it was going to be like 500 pages. So that'll probably be a game. I think that will be certainly a contribution to the field that I will have been, extremely proud of, just because it needs to have been done. So
absolutely,
so we'll see what happens with that.
We can't wait till it comes out.
Agree 100%. So let's shift gears here. Let's say you were given a billboard that everybody can see the entire world. What would you want that billboard to say, and why?
Good grief.
Could be anything.
Oh my goodness, that's a good question. Well, I'm gonna just, while I'm thinking about it, gonna go off and just a quick joke, because I've actually already seen the greatest billboard that's ever been done. This was one I saw. We were driving through Austin. It was right before the election, and it said, "Leaving the country after the election, let us sell your house." And I thought that was the single best piece of billboard advertising I had ever seen, because so many people were talking about leaving the U.S. I'm like, to me, that's the height of billboard advertising. God, what would I tell the world? I have absolutely no idea. I'm tempted to make another joke and go with be excellent to one another from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, but I really don't have an answer to that. It's a good question. I can't think of anything that I would really globally tell the world in that regards. What kind of answers do people typically give to this?
All kinds. Just, I mean, it could be a simple phrase, a word, just anything. Picture.
Trying to think one of my, I've got all kinds of catchphrases that people, I don't know, just because it's me and because people will expect something snarky for me. I think probably the catchphrase I'm most known for, well, it would be one of two. The first one is just simply, it depends, which is try to make the point. Everyone thinks there is a single answer to every question, and generally it depends. And the other one, which I think just sums up why you shouldn't argue with people, is you can't fix stupid. But yeah, let's go with it depends, because it's just a little bit less aggressive. I think if more people would stop falling to this either or kind of dichotomy of it's either this or that and there's no middle ground, like I think that alone would fix. Look at half the arguments on the internet. People aren't even arguing. They aren't even discussing with one another. They're talking across one another. Yeah. You know, they have the rule book answer that is right for all situations, and there's just so few cases where that ever is the truth. So yeah, depends. Let's go with that.
Okay, cool. All right, so let's shift over to what we call rapid dynamic questions. So these are kind of more rapid fire type of questions. So the first one I'll start off with is, just take me through a 24-hour day with you. What do you do in the morning? What do you do afternoon, night?
Well, like I was telling you before we started, my day is so weird that I don't know that it'll apply. So typical day, I'll get up 8:30-ish, take my meds and caffeine to wake up. I'll do some early internet stuff, check websites, maybe see what's on my Facebook group. Then it's time to tend to my dogs. So I'll walk the dogs, feed the dogs. Usually after that, I need whatever other internet work I need to do, whether it's work emails or a lot of what I do is like just my Facebook group and answering questions and things of that nature. Typically would go to the gym somewhere between probably 2 and 2:30, go train, for an hour. 1 o'clock, run the dogs. It's time to make them chase the ball just to tire them out. Go to the gym in the afternoon. If I'm in a writing mood, some work might get done. I tend to kind of alternate between sort of goofing off online, might watch TV, play PlayStation. I could be reading research. I could be writing. Feed the dogs at 6, usually have dinner, spend time with the girlfriend in the evening. And then I'm in bed by 10:30 or 11 because I'm old. Like, it's just kind of like, and my days are literally all the same. Like since I work at home, my gym schedule, I'm very much just a generally scheduled person. Like, I'm going home to Nashville for a week and I won't like it. I'll be stressed just because my normal pattern will be disrupted. Don't have the backyard to run my dogs in. I won't be able to be on exactly my schedule, and it really does very much a creature of habit kind of person. So that's my basic day.
Cool. Alrighty. So we're huge on having mentors, and we think a lot of mentors could lead to success. My question is, who are some of your key mentors? And I want to kind of just elaborate on that too. Do you feel that your mentors, even if they were, successful on paper, do you feel that they were successful in life?
Okay. One of my earliest mentors was actually my first martial arts instructor, who I think gave me my general philosophy of sort of coaching and teaching. He was he definitely was. Even then, he was an extremely successful coach, extremely successful martial artist. Last I checked, he's actually coaching basketball at a university. I was very lucky to pick up my mentor, probably 17 years. One of my best friends. Oddly, I met him twice personally. Now, once personally. He was a purely internet person. Met him in our early news group. He was actually an engineer, a rock engineer of all things, but training in physiology was his hobby. And I think more than anything, he taught me how to think critically, because engineering is very much a hard science. Physiology is frequently not. And he forced me to really think about what I was writing, what I was reading, what I was looking at, and he could find holes in anything. And certainly he was successful in his career. He worked for the government his whole life. Dan Duchesne was another very brief mentor in the 90s. He's a very infamous drug guru. You may or may not be familiar with the name. He was very big in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Very infamous drug guru. He wrote this Body Opus book. He was infamous. He was extremely successful in as much as he was unbelievably well known. And I think in a lot of ways I attempted for better or worse, to kind of take up his mantle. He was very polarizing. He always played it straight. He always told the truth, and he pissed off a lot of people. Mm-hmm. He also had the nerve to talk about anabolic steroids honestly at a time when that just wasn't done. So he also he was a lateral thinker in a way that I'm not. And he gave me, I think, a little bit more creativity. And those were really the big four. The 17-year, that mentor, Dave, probably did more than anybody to really impact, like I said, just on my critical thinking ability, and the way I tend to write, just because he was such a hard scientist. But the others certainly contributed to that, and I would say, yeah, they were all. Dave is just interesting because he wasn't in the field. He wrote for a magazine called Hard Gainer, this little thing that hasn't been published for years, but nobody would know him. People always like, who was your mentor? I'm like, you've never heard of him, because he just wasn't big in the industry. It was just his passion. But even that, I think, gave him a different perspective. It wasn't his career to do this. It was simply something that he'd always loved doing. Yeah. But absolutely, they were all successful in their own ways.
Okay. Nice. Okay. So what do you like to do for fun? And don't hold back on us.
Honestly,
besides PlayStation.
That's pretty much, I'm very much a homebody. Like, I've never been a bar person. If I have 2 drinks a year, that's big. I don't like live music. I like eating out, but I play a lot of PlayStation. I watch a lot of TV and movies. Luckily, the girlfriend is very similar in that regards. So we tend to just we'll go out and eat. We'll spend a lot of time in, and I'm really just kind of shockingly boring. I love spending time with my dogs and playing video games. I grew up from the 70s playing them, and it's just part of my life. And I guess, for a while, my performance art was being belligerent on the internet, and a lot of that was affected, but a lot of that was the bipolar. And I think several years ago, actually, after all that mess happened, I actually basically made an open apology to the internet. Yeah. Basically, you know what? Sorry for being an asshole for the last 20 years. And I won't say that I've gotten away from it completely, because it's just, it's the internet. I tend to overreact like everybody else. But there were certainly some times over my career I was way out of line, and it was part of dealing with the disease and was taking responsibility for it. Like, I know that's a big part of like the 12-step in Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's like you have to kind of take responsibility for your actions, because if you don't, you're never going to change them going forward. Yeah. So, still a work in progress.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so that's no longer as much of what I do anymore, but I'm very boring.
Yeah, I think we're all pretty boring to a certain extent.
Yeah, I think even when I was younger, I was in college. I wasn't a drinker. My dad had a brief alcoholic period, which really put me off on it. I just didn't really party. I was at UCLA. I mean, I hung out with friends, certainly, but I mean, I'm the ultimate designated driver. I just kind of didn't do any of that stuff. Very much a homebody, and I never got the memo. I spent college in the biomedical library pulling research. I never got the memo that you're supposed to spend it, getting drunk and getting laid. So I was busy. I was busy doing other things, apparently. So.
Gotcha. So what is one thing in your life that you want to let go of?
I don't know, honestly, like, as much fun as I had just sort of like being abusive to people, that's a part of my personality that I could really do without. Like, I think it came early on out of just sort of, I've always tested people. I've always sort of tried to push them away. Like, they have to break through and they have to kind of work their way through my nonsense, which, I think partly was just like, I tend to be very selective. You got to be able to put up with a lot of BS from me. But I think it's probably held me back on a social level. I think also, my obsessiveness, yes, it was probably a big part of why I'm successful. But on the other hand, you miss out on a lot of life's experiences, and that's, I think if you talk to anybody, if you talk to top athletes, they weren't going to parties, they weren't going to barbecues because they were training. And you make your choices, and I'm okay with that choice. But I do look back, I see people that have had, you know, a vastly larger number of different experiences, and I just never did. I was either, you know, I used to joke that 90% of my brain is focused on physiology and the other 10% is like video games, and I have an odd fascination with monkeys. But it's just kind of like that's all I cared about, and I just never did anything else. My mentor Dave for years was like, you need to go, you'll meet more people who you get along with if you go do more social things. But I just wasn't interested. I don't like sports ball. I don't like any of that stuff. So I just don't. I would rather be alone. So I think some of that I could have found better balance in my life. And I think to a first approximation, I'm doing that better now. I go through relatively better and worse time periods. I'll force myself to go to like that website meetup.com. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Oh, yeah,
basically, just I was pointed to that by my therapist actually, and I thought that was really excellent because it's like you can find like-minded people. It's not like I have to like go to a sports bar and you can go and I can go join the nerd groups and talk about video games and comic books. So I was doing that for a while, and I'll do that and not do that. But yeah, probably one of those two. Just that generally reactive, putting up walls, part of my personality, and or just the extreme obsessiveness. But again, I wouldn't be where I'm in my career, so six of one, half dozen the other.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. So before we get into the last question that we always ask our guests, Chris and I wanted to just take a moment to acknowledge you and just say thank you so much for just, you know, spending some time with us, you know, sharing your wisdom, sharing your story, being brave and courageous with that. We really appreciate that. And, you know, we've been fans of you for a long time. We've, you know, read your books, read your articles, and, you know, thank you so much just for everything you're doing to, you know, change the industry.
Yeah, and I want to chime in real quick too. Like, I know we are emailing back and forth, and this isn't the typical type of interview that you do, but I think that you have, you know, a big fan base out there, a lot of people that do respect you, and I think they need to hear this side about you and hear your actual story. You know, you put on some great podcasts. I mean, absolutely world-class information that I could say that I can apply to my clients in coaching, but I think people need to hear this, you know, with the story and everything.
It's just kind of before you, just real quickly, I will occasionally get questions from people, and they're like, okay, how can I be Lyle McDonald? And my answer is always, you don't want to be. Like, you, on some level, I'm like, I was just very much, you know, like we all are. We're all kind of the end result of a little bit of randomness, a little bit of luck. Like, I know I'm good at what I do. I know my obsession. I was in the right place at the right time. I was on the internet when it started, when websites needed content. My books came out. I'm not in the time period now because I'm not good at marketing. I'm not good at any of that. I was just kind of in the right place at the right time. But it's like, you know, I was born, I had just this weird obsessional mindset. If it had existed, I'm probably somewhere, you know, in that. I hate to be one of those guys that's like, oh, self-diagnosed Asperger's based on a BuzzFeed thing, but there's elements of my personality certainly that like, or just to have that obsessional drive to want to just grind on one thing for 20 years. It's a common personality trait in people that, you know, tends to look at every guy that's a multimillionaire. They don't have lives because they're making money 18 hours a day. Yeah. Athletes are training 20, like that's just, you have to have that drive. I was lucky enough to have, you know, a supportive family that supported what I did. Both my parents are musicians. I had the opportunity to go to UCLA to study at a very highly regarded school, which meant I had enough money to do it. And it's just a reality. I was affluent enough to, you know, be able to get the books and stuff and the resources and the information and education that I needed. Had a super amazing mentor for 17 years. Like, if all of that hadn't been there, or if I'd gone to the Naval Academy, which is my other college opportunity, believe it or not, you know, like what would have happened? What would have happened to me if that hadn't happened? What happened 2 years ago? What if that hadn't happened? And even that was just this weird, odd coincidence of me breaking up with my girlfriend at the time, meeting someone that was a terrible influence on me, ending up at this nightclub that happened to be being run into the ground, that happened to be needing to be sold while I was hypomanic, and it had like, there's just always these random things that just tend to happen. Now, if that hadn't happened, I still would have my life savings and I wouldn't have written this woman's book. So it's like all of these things had to happen at once. So yeah, Could you mimic some of that? Maybe. Yeah, but unless you have really good memory and the obsessiveness to spend 20 hours tracking down, I looked for a research paper I wanted for a decade just because I wanted to read it.
Yeah.
I kept an eye out for it for literally 10 years. My stubborn fat solution, which I joke I wrote in a very short period, that was a 10-year project because it was always in the back of my head for a decade working on that. I'd pick up snippets here and snippets there, and suddenly I'm like, it's time to write this book. So if you don't have that kind of mindset, you can't be me.
Yeah.
But you'll probably have a much more balanced life at the long run. So anyway, last question.
Gotcha.
Yeah. No, you definitely have a gift, and you're serving others out there. So my last question is, what is your definition of living a dynamic lifestyle?
I don't know because I don't. I'll be God's honest truth. I really don't live a dynamic lifestyle. I'm the most boring person in the world. My day, every day is the same. So I can do these. Everyone's like, oh, I get these emails. I know you're a really busy guy. No, I'm really not. This is going to cut into my Arkham Knight time, and that's fine because I'm only replaying it for the 6th time. I'm really not the guy to ask this question because I don't think I have one. Probably the most spontaneous thing I did was to decide to go to Salt Lake City and pursue speed skating for 5.5 years, which was nuts, but it was like, well, I'm 35, I'm living in Austin, I don't have a girlfriend, my job can be done anywhere I can plug in a computer. Why the hell not? I've wanted to do this my whole life, and I don't want to be 60 and look back and go, why didn't I?
Yeah.
And maybe that's the answer. I wrote an article series called No Regrets. And I sat there thinking about it. I'm like, do I really have a chance at 35 to make Olympic trials of the team? Well, probably not. But if it's that try and each shot you don't make, you miss.
Yeah.
If I hadn't gone, I could guarantee I wasn't going to do it.
Yeah.
And like I said, I didn't want to be 60 long past and gone, what if?
Yep.
Why wouldn't I have gone?
Exactly.
And maybe that's, within reality. Like, I hate that trite stuff that it's like, pick your passion and you'll never work a day in your life. Well, that's great. Can your passion pay your bills?
Yeah.
It's great to tell people, don't just get a job to make money. Well, I got news for you. Passion can't pay your bills and can't buy you food. And I wish that weren't the case. And if you can find a job that you do happen to love, more power to you. But there's a reality there that I was in a really weird situation that, again, I had the money and the job, whatever it is I do for a living, that I was able to make, and several people when I did that were like, man, I wish I had your guts. I'm like, what guts? I got nothing holding me back. I got no family. I got nothing. I got no reason not to do it and every reason to do it. So I went for it within the realities of my situation. So it's, if you don't talk to the girl, you're not taking her home. If you don't give it a shot, you're gonna fail.
Yep.
Now, if you give it a shot, guess what? You're probably still going to fail. I have bad news for you. Realistically, even if you give it a shot, you're probably still going to fail. And at some point, it's time to give up. Because I also don't agree with try again. Try again and then give up because there's no sense being a damn fool about it. Like I said, I was age 40 in Salt Lake. The year I really figured out skating about 2 months after I needed to. Right? Trials had passed. Now, I could have stayed there 4 more years. I did not want to be that 43-year-old guy chasing that dream. Yeah. I just didn't. Yeah. I was just like, you know what? I gave it my best for 5.5 years. I'm okay with it. If I quit and if I leave now, I'm not quitting. I told myself I would give it to here. I headed somewhere I needed to be. I'd had someone waiting on me for 4 years, and it was time for me to move on with my life. I was happy with the effort I'd given it to it. You see those guys and they're still 45. Our band could break any year now. Dude, it's been 20 years. I think it's time to give up on the dream. Yeah. So it's like, make sure you don't have any regrets looking back, but at the same time, don't stick with something when it's clear you're not going to make it. Yeah. Everybody can't be a millionaire. Everyone can't be Mr. Olympia. Give it God's honest shot. And then move on with your life and do something that you can accomplish.
I agree 100%.
I love it.
So that moves us into where can our listeners, keep up with your work and just keep up with the notifications about the women's book?
The website is bodyrecomposition.com. Okay. All one word. LyallMcDonald.com will get you there. If you put in Lyle McDonald, you'll find me. I still have a forum that let's face it, forums are dead in the era of Facebook. They really are. There's not much going on there.
Yeah.
Best place to probably find me, and all my articles and books are on the website. Best place to find me is in my Facebook group, and it's also called Body Recomposition. Yeah. Very active. I think we're almost near 10,000 people. I'm on there every day. I answer most questions. Just because I enjoy doing it. I've got a personal wall that is maxed out on friends. I've got a business page that I don't use. So really the Facebook group is probably the best place if you actually want to interact with me. And the website. And trust me, when the book's out, everybody will know. I don't think there's any danger with that. So this is like my first book, that the longer it takes, the more the hype kind of builds up. Because my first book was 2 more weeks for about a year. And every time I swore it was going to be done. But it's like getting construction on your house, man. Yeah, we'll be done in about 6 weeks. Okay. 6 months later, your kitchen is still a disaster. These things don't. If you ever write a book, you'll understand.
Yeah. All right, Lyall.
Once the 50% is done. So, all right, guys.
Well, right on. Thank you so much again for spending time with us. We'll have all that up in the show notes. And again, I mean, just thank you so much for spending time with us, telling us your story. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, we'll talk soon.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, guys, for tuning into our video. We really, really appreciate it. And before you guys go, make sure to subscribe below to our newsletter so you guys can get our free and new book, The 4 Pillars of Becoming Dynamic Within Fitness.